I can't speak. I can't. Where do I even start? The ultimate learning lesson here is that these double headers are such a silly idea. When you want to set up a fight between two guys, so you put them both in fights on the same show that they are massive favourites in and very much expected to win, to build more hype for their fight between each other down the line. It's too risky, so just put the fight on that we all want to see. So this doubleheader with Caleb Plant versus Jose Armando Resendez as the main event and Jamal Charlo versus Thomas Lamanna as the co-main event was meant to set up quite an anticipated matchup between Jamal Charlo and Caleb Plant. You know, there's a bit of history between those two. So Jamal Charlo and Caleb Plant were both huge favourites coming into their respective matchups, but Plant was the bigger favourite. On the bookies I was personally using, Charlo was a 1-16 favourite and Plant was a 1-25 favourite. And if anything, this doubleheader was more so to ease the inactive Jamal Charlo back into boxing. His last fight was a year and a half ago now, and that fight was his only fight in the last 4 years. He was suffering from injuries and alcohol abuse, and there were a lot of questions around his mentality going into this comeback fight. But Plant was the reigning WBA interim super middleweight champion, who was more expected to get the job done in his fight. Now, that's not to say any of us really thought that Thomas Lamanna was going to defeat the undefeated Jamal Charlo, but the point here is that if either Plant or Charlo would suffer an upset loss, it would have been Charlo. I was expressing this notion in my community posts, and most of you who interact with my community posts were agreeing that Charlo was the more likely one to lose. I even ran a poll and look, 76% of you thought that Charlo would be more likely to lose his fight than Plant was. But what do you know? Jamal Charlo made it look easy against Thomas Lamanna in the co-main event in a nice statement win, so surely we were live, and this doubleheader was going to go well. The lesser of the two favourites in the doubleheader made easy work of his opponent. But then in the main event, well, Jose Armando Resendez would absolutely batter Caleb Plant to win a 12-round split decision. Yeah, one judge actually gave that fight to Plant, but Resendez was of course the rightful winner, and he had Plant hurt multiple times in there. And just like that, the Charlo Plant doubleheader absolutely flopped. Jamal Charlo versus Caleb Plant is now dead thanks to Plant's loss. This is the second time we've seen this thing happen within the space of a month now, as back on May 2nd, we had that Times Square card in which Ryan Garcia main evented against Rolly Romero and Devin Haney co-main evented against Jose Ramirez. Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney both came in as massive favourites against their respective opponents, and this doubleheader was meant to set up a hugely anticipated rematch between Haney and Garcia. And what do you know? Ryan Garcia got dropped by Rolly Romero in that main event and put on a timid performance to lose a convincing decision, thus killing the potential rematch between him and Haney, as if Haney's boring performance in the co-main event wasn't enough to kill the hype, but Haney actually won his fight to be fair. This is such a stupid thing to do. Just make the fight you want to make and that we all want to see. Trying to give each of the fighters a step up fight is just an unnecessary gamble and leaves so much room for things to go wrong. But if the right guys do both win in the doubleheader, they come in as such massive favourites in their respective fights anyway and are so expected to win that it don't build up the hype that much more. It brews it up a bit more I suppose, but again, these little doubleheaders are just way too much of a gamble just to make the potential big fight between the two fighters in question like 25% bigger than it would have been without the doubleheader at best. Let this Plant vs Charlo doubleheader be the final nail in the coffin for this concept. Now that's not to say that the PBC should have learned from the mistake of the Haney-Garcia doubleheader, because this Plant Charlo doubleheader was already made before that Times Square card happened. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's just not a great idea anyway. Remember the second ever Riyadh season card at the end of 2023, the AJ vs Wilder doubleheader, or the Day of Reckoning. You've got Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder all over the posters together, as if they're finally fighting each other. But instead, you make AJ vs Otto Wallin as the main event, and Wilder vs Joseph Parker as the co-main, just to drag it out and set up the AJ vs Wilder fight that was already past its sell-by date. Then boom, Parker absolutely outboxed and defeated Wilder to derail all the plans for the big AJ vs Wilder fight. This is why you've got to just put the fight on. No boxing fans asked for AJ vs Wallin, Wilder vs Parker, Haney vs Ramirez, Garcia vs Romero, Charlo vs Lamanna, nor Plant vs Resendez. But the promoters have their little plans to try and force making the fight bigger than it already is or possibly can even be, and it blows up in their faces. Of course, big props to Joseph Parker, Rolly Romero and Jose Armando Resendez for pulling off the upsets in those respective fights, and to be fair, both Deontay Wilder vs Joseph Parker and Rolly Romero vs Ryan Garcia were fights that a large number of boxing fans have been wanting to see for years. But believe you me, there was a bigger audience for both AJ vs Wilder and Garcia vs Haney too than those aforementioned fights that did happen. So just make the fights we want to see, you dig? I am indeed put the fight on. Look, this is an immediate reaction to a fight that finished after 4 AM here in the UK. The sun's already long gone up as I speak, and it will be well into the day by the time I edit and post this joint. I was tired before the Caleb Plant fight even started, so I'm not going to say everything I was meaning to say right now, but I do want to again congratulate Resendez for his performance. Now here's how I scored the fight, as you can see on screen. That's 117 to 111 to Resendez, only giving Plant rounds 1, 2 and 4. By the way, it was Judge David Sutherland who scored that fight to Plant. Fire him now. Now here's the thing, I got Resendez at 14 to 1 on a live bet after round 3. I'm definitely not going to gas that bet up because I only stuck a fiver on it, and that return doesn't come anywhere close to breaking me even in my current losing streak. Nowhere near, not even a fraction, and I now lack the opportunities that I usually have to break even due to the football season being over. So I don't bring this up to show off that poxy little bet at all, but I show this to tell you guys why I sensed a Plant loss at this point in the fight. So simply put, Plant showed a little bit of shakiness and vulnerability in that third round. But that shouldn't have been enough to write him off because he looked very vulnerable at times against Trevor McCumbee in his last fight and came back to stop McCumbee. But the thing is, I just did not envisage Plant being able to stop Resendez at all. Resendez looked a much stronger fighter in that third round, and I didn't see that changing in the rounds following. And my gut feeling turned out to be right, as Resendez pretty much punched up Plant for the rest of the fight and thankfully got a fair shake on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards. Now there's this narrative that Caleb Plant fades later in the fight, which is kind of true I guess, because back in that Benavidez fight in 2023, I had Plant well ahead at the halfway point of the fight. Then he wound up losing every round in the second half of the fight. But I think this could be what is known as the Canelo effect. After his loss to Canelo in 2021, Plant has gone 2-2, and in his last 2 fights, he has looked very weak against unknown and lower level opponents. Got dropped and physically bullied by McCumbee before coming back to win, and this time against Resendez, he gets beaten up for 12 rounds and he lost. So I guess that beating from Canelo started a downward trajectory of his punch resistance. I mean, this has been a thing for years, but another more recent case is Jaime Munguia. 12 tough rounds with Canelo in their fights, then after the loss he has a comeback fight with a random with a low KO percentage and gets chinned, then he needs to take PEDs to win a closely contested decision over him in the rematch. It's crazy, innit? So yeah, I guess Plant will never be the same again, and he is just a little bit washed up. As for Jamal Charlo, look, I don't want to hype him up too much for beating Thomas Lamanna at all, but Charlo did look poised and meticulous in there. He picked his punches well, dropped Lamanna 3 times, and got the doctor stoppage win after the 5th round. From time Charlo busted Lamanna's face up with a jab in the opening round, I knew he was headed for the stoppage. Literally just like Khalil Cole the night before. Bloodied Galejos' face up with a jab in the first, and I'm like, yeah, he's got him for sure. And that fight would be stopped between the 5th and 6th round, just like the Charlo vs Lamanna fight. I thought Lamanna was OD locked in, man. I thought he could pull the upset off, but I guess not. To be fair, the stoppage could definitely be called early, by my bloodthirsty standards at least, but Lamanna was never going to come back and win, and he probably got saved from a potentially embarrassing conclusion to the fight. The thing is with Charlo now, we need to see him fight again before the end of the calendar year, at least, or this little comeback fight against Lamanna would have then been a waste of time. The issue is, Charlo did have a clear goal to work towards after the Lamanna fight, in that Caleb Plant fight, but assuming that that fight is now derailed after Plant's loss, perhaps Charlo's motivation will be sidetracked, so to speak, without a clear next step. But no, Charlo's got his win and his little WBA belt, whatever variation of the WBA title that is, international maybe, it's not like BoxRec will tell us, and Charlo needs to turn around quickly to work his way towards a title. Why not just put him against Resendez for the WBA interim title? Charlo's last comeback fight against Joseph Benavidez Jr. ended up being pointless as he had a year and a half off after, and Keith Thurman has done this sort of thing as well. No disrespect, but they almost waste our time with a comeback fight just to stay inactive after the fact. By the way, me saying that Charlo should be fighting again before the end of the calendar year is generous. That's a good bit over half a year. I'm trying to see that boy fight in September or something. Again, why not against Resendez? He's the one that beat Plant, so he should take his spot. But yeah, that's just my little rush take on the results of the Plant-Charlo doubleheader. Not much in the way of actual boxing analysis here, but I did just want to look at the bigger picture in regards to all of the doubleheader bollocks. And I was ready for this to happen as well. As for the Friday night fights, of course I just briefly mentioned that Khalil Cole vs Galejos rematch. Great performance from Cole for the stoppage win there. But that Matchroom main event was on at the same time as the Golden Boy main event, on the same platform, The Zone. That main event between Melokuziev and Foljam, which was a great fight from what I saw. But now, as rare as Friday night fights are these days, it really is a curious case that Matchroom and Golden Boy, two promotional companies who are with the same broadcaster, would clash like that on a Friday night. How are us little nerds who want to watch every fight live meant to cope with such a thing? Another thing I do want to give mention to now is the brain surgery of Ginjiro Shigayoka. I reacted to the Angelo Leo vs Tomoki Kameda fight from last week in a recent video, and I did briefly mention that the minimum weight title fight in that co-main event between Shigayoka and Pedro Tadaran was a good one, but I forgot to mention that after losing that unanimous decision, Shigayoka would collapse in the ring and be stretchered off. Usually when that happens after a fighter is on their feet and conscious right after the fight, as opposed to being knocked out cold, a la Gerald McClellan, Scott Westgarth and Pritchard Colon, it does end up being bad. And when the news came out that Shigayoka required brain surgery, it was a scare. So it's good to hear now that Shigayoka is in stable condition after the surgery, and my prayers go out to him that he maintains full brain health. He will of course never box again now, and I do hope that he can have some type of involvement in the sport outside of the ring, as we know how passionate fighters can be about the sport. But let's just hope he doesn't do a Nick Blackwell, let's just say that. And there's so much else going on in boxing right now that I do want to do videos on. Of course, those who have been following the recent videos will be able to tell that I'm trying my best to keep up with reacting to fights after they take place. But there's so much to be said about upcoming fights in boxing, and other little dramas going on like Teofimo Lopez crashing out and upsetting His Excellency, old Yusuf Amir. But I ain't had the chance to do any videos on that sort of thing, because as some of you may know, I've been working on that big Bobby Pacquiao video. I've been OD locked into that one, as Thomas Lamanna might say. So the only thing I've been doing outside of that right now is reacting to fights, of course. But after I get the Bobby Pacquiao documentary up, I do hope to do some pre-fight content for some upcoming fights. But yeah, sorry for the moody tone of this video today. I probably ought to have went to sleep after the Caleb Plant fight, then worked on a video when I woke up. But I can't afford to get the video up too late. No rest for the wicked, as they say, yeah? But yeah, thanks to all the real ones who have been supporting the work, even just interacting with all of my community posts and stuff like that. Please drop a like on this video, and you have been listening to O.M.E Boxing.